Good afternoon, everyone. So as everyone's coming in, I just want to give a quick introduction to our speakers today. So my name is Emily Mercer, and I'm one of the project managers at Advanced CTR, and we are very lucky to have Ariel Knightenson and Andrew Creamer here to give us some information on the new NIH policy for data management and sharing that will be coming out in January. I'm going to open up the floor to both of them, but I just want to thank everyone for coming and registering for this great information session. Thank you.
Can everyone see my screen okay?
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Knightenson, and I'm the Assistant Director of Research Integrity in Brown's Office of Research Integrity. Today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the new NIH policy for data management and sharing, after which my colleague, Andrew Creamer, will share tools available to researchers to draft and comply with their data management plans. As we present, please leave any questions you have down in the chat, and we will respond to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. All right, so the policy is fairly straightforward in that it only has two basic requirements. First, it requires the submission of a data management and sharing plan for all NIH-funded research. This plan will generally describe how, where, and when data will be shared. I want to point out that this is a change from the 2003 data sharing policy, as that policy only applies to applicants seeking $500,000 or more in 1 year, while the new policy applies regardless of funding level. Second, once an award is made and the plan is approved by the funding NIH Institute Center or Office, the acronym for that is ICO, Institute Center or Office, compliance with that approved plan will be a term and condition of the award. The policy states that compliance can affect future funding decisions. The policy will take effect for new and competing awards submitted for the January 25th, 2023 receipt date, at which point it will replace the 2003 data sharing policy. NIH also published 6 supplemental information documents alongside the policy to help the community comply with the policy, as well as an FAQ document. And I'll discuss these supplements in more detail later. And finally, the purpose of all this is to foster a cultural change towards greater data stewardship, where data management and sharing are viewed as an integral part of the research process and are adequately planned for from the beginning. All right, so there are several other aspects of the policy that I'd like to highlight. First, and central to understanding this policy, is that the policy applies to all NIH-supported research that generates scientific data, including research projects, some career development awards, small business or SBIR, STTR programs, and research centers. The DMS policy does not apply to research and other activities that do not generate scientific data, including training grants, fellowship grants, construction grants, conference grants, resource grants, and or research-related infrastructure programs. So that obviously begs the question, what is scientific data? Scientific data is specifically defined in the policy as the recorded factual material commonly accepted in the scientific community as being of sufficient quality to validate and replicate research findings, regardless of whether data are used to support scholarly publications. Certain things are explicitly excluded from this definition, such as preliminary analyses, peer reviews, and any physical objects such as biospecimens. In terms of timelines, the policy expects the data should be made available no later than the time of publication or by the end of the award for unpublished data, whichever comes first. And this policy does not specifically dictate for how long data need to be made available for. There's a number of additional expectations that I'd like to highlight. First, you'll note that the policy requires only the submission of plans and compliance with those plans. It doesn't directly require data sharing, but it does expect that in drafting their plans, applicants will attempt to maximize appropriate data sharing. And of course, because these plans become binding, awardees will be held to what those plans say. The policy provides 3 categories of reasons why data sharing may be limited to some degree, specifically for ethical, legal, or technical factors. So while all scientific data must be managed, not all scientific data must be shared. Sharing should always be responsibly implemented, and the policy and supplemental information expect that plans will outline how participants' privacy, rights, and confidentiality will be protected. It's also important to note that existing laws, regulations, and policies will continue to apply. Nothing in the policy changes expectations under, for example, the Common Rule, HIPAA, or the NIH Certificates of Confidentiality policy. In general, the policy emphasizes prospective planning and calls on applicants to consider, when drafting their plans, how they will communicate what they are proposing to research participants as part of the informed consent process. And lastly, the policy also strongly encourages applicants to consider whether access to human data, even if de-identified, should be made available only in a controlled manner. I want to make clear that this policy should be thought of as a minimum requirement for NIH's data management and sharing expectations. Some institute centers or offices, the ICOs, like NIMH and NIAAA, already have data sharing policies in place, which are much stricter and require, with some exceptions, de-identified human subjects data to be uploaded to specific repositories. This policy does not replace those policies. Rather, it establishes a minimal data management and sharing expectation that can be supplemented by more prescriptive ICO requirements. To reiterate, this policy does not propose any new expectations for the conduct of research with human participants. We'll now briefly review the 6 supplemental information documents released by NIH. NIH also released an FAQ document that is available on our website. In the elements of a data management and sharing plan supplement, NIH recommends several key elements for data management and sharing plans, including the data type, related tools, software, and code needed to access or manipulate the data, standards that will be applied to the data and any accompanying metadata, details on data preservation, access, and associated timelines, access, distribution, and reuse considerations, including any factors that might limit data access or availability to some degree, and a description of how compliance will be monitored at the institution and who will have that responsibility. These plans should be 2 pages or less, so they're short, and we recommend checking out the supplemental information document for more information. In terms of the method for sharing data, the policy encourages the use of established repositories. So NIH has provided supplemental information on helping investigators select repositories with desirable characteristics. Note this policy does not require the use of any specific repository, although specific NIH ICOs may have policies that require the use of a specific repository. So for example, NIMH requires de-identified human subjects data to be submitted to the NIMH Data Archive, or NDA. NIH has also provided supplemental information on allowable costs, highlighting what types of costs can be considered costs of data management and sharing allowed in budget requests. Costs allowed in budget requests include things like curating data, developing supporting documentation, preserving and sharing data through repositories, and local data management considerations. Costs that cannot be considered part of data management and sharing include infrastructure costs typically included in indirect costs and costs associated with the routine conduct of research. The policy expects that plans outlining how scientific data will be managed or shared will be submitted with the application for funding. In peer review, the reviewers may only comment on the proposed budget for data management and sharing, and these comments will not impact the score. The plans themselves will undergo programmatic assessment by NIH as determined by the proposed institute, center, or office. And as the project progresses, plans should be updated by researchers and assessed by NIH program staff during regular reporting intervals or sooner. Once an award is made, compliance with the approved plan will become a term and condition of the award. The Protecting Privacy When Sharing Human Research Participant Data Supplemental Information Document provides a basic framework for considering how to protect privacy when sharing data from human participants. It is not intended as a guide for regulatory compliance, and it is broadly applicable to different research contexts. This supplemental information document establishes shared principles, provides best practices, and offers considerations for determining whether to control access to data. The supplemental information document on the responsible management and sharing of American Indian and Alaska Native participant data provides information to assist in developing appropriate DMS plans. It emphasizes respect for tribal sovereignty, partnership and mutual agreements, and building trust. The final supplemental information document describes implementation changes for genomic data sharing or GDS plans included with applications due on or after January 25th, 2023. First, let's explain the GDS policy. The GDS policy sets expectations and responsibilities to ensure broad, responsible, and timely sharing of genomic research data. In an effort to reduce the burden of duplicative reporting expectations, so a genomic data sharing plan where applicable and a data management and sharing plan starting on January 25th, 2023, NIH is requiring researchers to establish a single plan submission for requirement for research subject to both of those policies. This supplemental document walks researchers through how to best harmonize these two plans if you're required to submit both. If you want to learn more, I recommend checking out our new website where you can find links to the new policy and the supplemental information documents, a link to the new NIH scientific data sharing website, which is NIH's one-stop shop for all the information you need about NIH data sharing policies, including this policy and its supplemental information, links to Brown's library resources organized by the project lifecycle, from preparing for data, collecting data, data collection, sharing data, and finally project closeout. And Andrew will discuss this information in the next portion of our presentation, as well as other library resources. We have data repository informed consent templates. So if your approved data management and sharing plan requires human subjects data to be shared, participants must consent before the research data can be shared. So Ita Irizarry from the Human Research Protection Program and I created several data repository informed consent templates for your use. And finally, training videos, which basically reiterate all the information we are sharing with you today, except the last three supplemental information documents are not discussed in those training videos because that information is brand new. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll now turn the talk over to Andrew.
Thank you, Ariel. Are folks able to see my screen and slides?
Looks good.
Looks good.
Thank you. So again, I'm Andrew. I'm the Open Science Librarian here in the Sciences Library, and today I'm going to be sharing some resources that we have available at this moment for helping researchers to write NIH data management and sharing plans. And I'm going to highlight some resources that are also available to the broader advanced CTR community. So for example, our electronic lab notebook, which license includes other researchers at affiliate hospitals, for example, with Brown login. So and some open resources as well that are open to anyone. So I'd like to start with highlighting that we do have a DMP, a data management plan consulting service within the library. So you can reach out at data_management@brown.edu. So if I speak too quickly or go too quickly through a slide, or you're interested in some of these resources, you're always welcome to reach out to schedule a consultation here in the library to look to see if we have local resources that we can connect you with to incorporate into your data management and sharing plan, or consulting on helping to draft the data management plan or review the data management plan. So there's a link down here to our library webpage. I'd like to highlight a specific tool called the DMP tool, which was developed by the California Digital Library. It's available here at this URL highlighted in yellow at the top. Brown is a member of this organization resource, and if you start typing in your email, you will be able to sign in with your single sign-on. If you don't have a Brown login, it's still available it's an open resource. And you just have to go in, and I'll show that space where you add in institutional guidance, so you can still access Brown University specific guidance within the DMP tool, even if you're not necessarily having a Brown login. You can add actually up to 6 institutions resource guidance and templates in addition to those that are made available by the funder. So once you log in and authenticate, you'll be asked to specify the funder for which you're writing a data management plan. And so today we're talking about NIH, but there are, in addition to the NIH, other federal US funders, some foundation like HHMI and Gates Foundation, in addition to some now international funders that are also available here. So even though we're talking about NIH, I'd like to make a plug for this tool for other proposals that you might be working on. So you identify NIH, and you'll notice on the dropdown that you can now choose from 3 templates. So the current generic data management plan that's being phased out, and then the new one, which I've highlighted here with the orange arrow at the bottom for the 2023 January data management and sharing plan. And then, as Ariel has noted, the genomic data sharing plan will change so that it will be incorporated into the data management and sharing plan in 2023. So at this point, that plan would is sort of in flux at the moment. So we're happy to talk more about that in a consultation. So in your account in the DMP tool, so your proposal is here in this cloud-based space, and it's only available to you, and you access your plan, and you can save your plan for future use or reference. But you can also add collaborators, so a co-investigator, to be able to help edit the plan. If you share it as a co-owner, it will also be available in their dashboard and their cloud-based account. Or you can share it with collaborators as a read-only document, so that they're not able to actually edit the content. Once you hit create plan and go to the right plan tab at the top of the tool, you'll see all of those sections that Ariel highlighted as the elements comprising the NIH data management and sharing plan now become part of each section. Has it highlighted with that plus, where you can open it up and fill out each section, and then it will sort of tie it all together into a 2-page document when you're done. And so if you expand on one of those sections, what you'll see is unique for NIH compared to some of the other templates. If you've used DMP tool in the past, for example, one, you'll notice that there is the guidance to walk you through each of those sections. But what's unique to NIH is below it, there's some sort of text where NIH has provided sort of sample answers to help guide your entry for that specific section. So for example, in this data type, there's sort of this prompt that NIH makes available. And you'll notice on the right side, there's a guidance tab. And in the top left, you'll see the NIH. So many of those resources that Ariel had mentioned will pop up there. So you have them at the time of writing your plan. And then you also see the Brown tab, where a lot of the resources that I'll be sharing today will sort of pop up there with links, for example, to OVPR's research data management page and the new OVPR NIH data management sharing policy specific page that Ariel just introduced. So in addition to some of these other open tools and resources that we have available. I'm going to move on to the next one. So we've recently reorganized this guidance. Ariel mentioned that the NIH specific plan has been more in sort of a research lifecycle flow. And so we've tried to match that. And so in the guidance, you'll find quick access to some of the policies related to data and data sharing at Brown. So for example, the research data management, retention and sharing policy, the patent and innovation policy, Brown's copyright policy and Brown's policy on handling restricted information. So all of that's in one place. You have a link to OVPR's policy support page with those data onboarding checklists that OVPR has created, the data sharing repository, informed consent for specific age groups that Ariel mentioned, our updated GDS template. There's an asterisk. It's sort of in works to match the new H forms for January 2023. Then we have our data collection resources that we have. Some are open resources that are just to help with curation of data and things focused on fair data principles and metadata guidance. We have some other colleagues on campus links to, for example, the information security group's data classifications. The CCB has developed a great new storage finder based off of one at Cornell, where you can link out to specific data storage options based on classification level and other needs. Link to our electronic laboratory notebook, Lab Archives, and then as well as resources that at Brown for data sharing, our data use agreement folks and material transfer agreements, CCV's Globus for transferring large data sets, links to our repository, the Brown Digital Repository, our data site DOI service, so for obtaining a digital object identifier to attach to a data set or code that you want to cite within a publication or an RPPR. Some of the member repositories we have that again are open to our advanced CTR community, and some other Brown spaces that we have within open repositories, and then offboarding checklists. So all of these are sort of a summary of what you'll find in sort of that expanded guidance section, in addition to some feedback on what to have in those sections. And there's also a tab for feedback. So after you've drafted your 2-page plan, if you want to share the plan with us in the library to see if we can help connect any more local resources or comments on fair principles or metadata, you can request feedback, and we get sort of an email that says someone has shared a plan with us, and we can log in and access your plan within your DMP tool account. You can also email us. There's a link up at the top. You'll see Research Data Management Specialist, and click that and send us a message that way. Once you've finished drafting your plan and you've incorporated your comments and feedbacks from your co-investigators, or if you've shared them with us and we've shared it with our colleagues on campus to get their feedback, you can export it into several forms so that you can then implement it as part of your proposal. And then there's also a new feature, or I should also say you can set visibility. So your default for your own account is private unless you've shared it with other folks, your co-investigators or folks here in the library, or you can make it available to folks just within your organization, or you can make it public if you so choose. And there are public DMPs that folks who have drafted data management plans have decided to share them back with their community that you can access along the top menu. But what's new now is that NSF in 2019 started promoting what they call machine readable data management plans and incorporating persistent identifiers or PIDs, such as a digital object identifier for a data management plan, so that it can be sort of tracked throughout the life cycle of your project. And so you can generate a DMP ID, and I'll sort of mention some places where that might be handy to come in handy here in our slides. So the DMP tool, I'm happy to have consultations on using that tool. If you'd like a deeper dive into drafting a data management plan for NIH using that specific tool, or a genomic data sharing plan using that tool. To access Lab Archives, as I mentioned before, it is open to our affiliates with Brown logins. If you go to Lab Archives at Brown, you can email us if you have some need of support to open up a notebook. Usually in the biomedical context, we recommend that the principal investigator set up a lab notebook for each member of their research group or lab, so that when someone graduates, for example, as a graduate student or a postdoctoral researcher might take a position outside of Brown, that the principal investigator retains a copy of all the notebooks. And so the idea of that sort of data retention sort of being built in, and then the PI can make a copy of that notebook for that departing researcher then to take with them, so that they can still take the data that they worked on with them after they've left the lab. There are some unique features to lab archives. One is this sort of Code of Federal Regulations part that has very detailed versioning. So the subscription we have, nothing is actually deleted. So there is sort of a trash can. You can move items to that trash can, but things are actually never really deleted from your account. And that versioning tracks, who made a change, what change was made, when it was made. PIs can implement signing and witnessing features, for example. There are some other new enhancements that I'll mention here that have to do with the NIH plan, but there's just general some advantages of using electronic lab notebooks, such as being able to set up sort of standardized way to collect metadata, to share a notebook with external collaborators, for example, or you can share notebooks internally within a research group, or pages, or even at the entry level. There is, in our current subscription, since we've had since 2015, we continue to have unlimited storage for a new 3-year subscription. There's some integration with some tools, Jupyter Notebook, SnapGene, GraphPad. A new one is protocols.io, an open platform for sharing experimental protocols and data sharing protocols. Or I'm sorry, data analysis protocols. And then at the end of your project, if you want to, you can sort of export it as a PDF or HTML file that we can then archive for you in the Brown Digital Repository. Save some paper space to meet the whatever data retention restrictions that or requirements that you have. So I will move on to the next page, which is also of interest to our advanced CTR community here, is that for example, our colleagues at Mass General Hospital and Brigham and Women's, their lab archives, they actually allow PHI in their notebooks. That's not the case here, but they have now an integration for folks using REDCap to import data from REDCap directly into their lab archives notebook. And so this might be something to sort of revisit in the future in terms of the data classification, risk classification. But in this case, if there are ways that you might want to import de-identified information into your notebook, that is in the works at the moment. In addition to the ability to share your notebook directly on the web, so you can actually publish your notebook to the web, or have a data set within your notebook that you can publish to the web and get a DOI for. So your notebook in itself becomes a repository. Right now, this is sort of buttoned down at Brown. So our initial subscription, the fear that someone working in innovation, patent innovation, or intellectual property might accidentally publish their lab archives to the web. So that was sort of disabled at an institutional level. And so this is something, again, to sort of revisit with our OVPR administrators to see if that's something that could be revisited to see if folks can take advantage of that. Otherwise, it has to be done on an individual level. So someone would need to contact us to then make their specific notebook or a data set within their notebook publicly available. And so here on the right side are some other enhancements that lab archives are making to meet the policy for NIH. Also, I should notice that DMP ID, again, that's generated from the DMP tool, that can again follow, from your data management plan. It's also can be incorporated into your notebook, so the notebook associated with that project, so that you can see how that DMP ID will sort of travel all the way to the sort of RPPR stage for reporting. So in terms of resources that we have for sharing data, in addition to our local data repository, the BDR, and the ICOs that Ariel mentioned that might have sort of a mandate for data to go for specific human subjects repositories. For folks that have more generalist repository needs, there is sort of initiative at NIH to sort of cooperate with some of these better known open repositories. And so at Brown, we've sort of made spaces within these open repositories. So for example, we have, I can move to the next page, our open science framework. We have sort of a Brown for institutions. So Brown pays sort of a contribution to the Center for Open Science for sort of this grounded space to support their open repository mission. And so you can have a project here, have collaborators, make it private, integrate with various storage options, and then make it public to share your data, your code, or your publications with the public. And also get a persistent identifier for citation within a publication. So this is one of the open repository spaces we've carved out, a Brown branded space. Similarly with Harvard Dataverse, you'll notice that we now have a space within Harvard Dataverse that folks are taking advantage of. And similarly, you can generate, there's a self-upload option for a project or a data set, and then you can generate, you fill in the metadata and generate a DOI or digital object identifier for citation of your data set or code or other research object that you're sharing. And then Zenodo, so folks might be familiar with Zenodo more in the physical sciences, but they have an integration with GitHub that's useful for taking a GitHub repository and then publishing that specific version and sort of freezing that version and getting a digital object identifier so that you can cite that specific version of code within a paper. And so there is sort of a Brown University Zenodo community within that open repository. So we're in some of these spaces and hopefully growing and more of them that NIH has made available. I'll also point out for the Zenodo example is NYU's created this sort of ReproZip tool. So if you have research software that you want to sort of take in some of the dependencies that would be required for running the software in the future, that it can sort of capture that environment and sort of a way to capture that to be deposited as well. So there are some emerging tools. And then we have folks that take advantage of our own local data sharing repository, the Brown Digital Repository. So we have the Brown University Open Data Collection. There's about 750 data sets in there at the moment that are publicly funded and made available. We have some advantages of using the BDR. One is that there isn't a restriction on the number of files or a restriction on the ultimate size of the data set that someone wants to archive. And there are some caveats to that. One is that the project is publicly funded and that it's cited in a publication and it's publicly available. So if it meets those three bars. So we also have a DOI service associated with the BDR. So if you deposit an object in the BDR, we can assign it a digital object identifier so that you can then cite it within your publication or your grant report. And this is just an example of folks that have taken us up on that service. Here, Professor Chan, for example, and Professor Marshall and others who have cited a DOI that resolves back to the repository. So folks can find information about if there's a data set that they can't share because it's restricted by a data use agreement, but there's documentation and code that they can access through the repository. We also have a Globus endpoint with the BDR. As I mentioned, since there isn't a restriction on the number of files or size, we have some data sets that are too large to download over the web. So we have this, thanks to CCV and our partners and colleagues there, we have this Globus service. So for example, here, Professor Wong has a 2 terabyte data set that we're able to then share publicly that's funded by the NIH And so we're hoping that's another service that folks might consider using our local data option, our data sharing option. RIO's office has also kindly generated for folks that have consenting so that they can share de-identified information through one of these repositories. They've created sort of a de-identifications checklist so that folks can go through and say the method that they have used to determine that it's de-identified and have that information sort of captured as metadata for the provenance of that data set in the future. So if 10 years from now, someone is interested in that particular data set, they can find that information alongside the data and code as well. And as I highlighted in our DMP tool guidance, our CCD colleagues have created this new tool based off one at Cornell, where you can put in details about the data that you're collecting, your data risk classification level, whether or not you need a digital object identifier, if you need sort of disaster recovery and other details, high performance computing needs, and it will sort of link you to some of these resources. So you'll notice that the BDR and the lab archives that I've mentioned for data sharing and data management are now sort of incorporated into that structure and discoverable there. So in addition to these open repositories, Brown has memberships that we pay so that folks in our community and affiliate communities can use. So for example, one is ICPSR, better known within the public health community, but this is a great repository because it has a secure data enclave option. So if folks have de-identified data and they have a data use agreement, but they don't want to sort of handle that transaction, you can use the secure data enclave option so that folks, they would apply through the data use committee at ICPSR, have their IRB documentation through ICPSR and access those data sets through ICPSR without having to have that dependent on a researcher, for example, who might change organizations or retire or whatnot. So that's just some of the advantages for ICPSR. Even though it's better known for quantitative data, we also have, there is an open option within ICPSR. So for example, here, Dr. Collins and Professor Marshall have used this for some of their materials. So if there are, ways that you don't necessarily need some of those curatorial or secure enclave options at ICPSR, there is an open section here to share data as well that we can help in the library with putting together an item record and with metadata. And we have, for qualitative information, a recent membership with the Qualitative Data Repository, which is based at Syracuse, which has been super helpful because they have researchers there who sort of help folks address sort of the ethical dimensions of their qualitative research and sort of work with them to sort of identify the data assets that they'll be creating, qualitative data assets, and then sort of working through the stage of how those might be documented and shared and preserved after their project is done. And so through our paid membership, these consultations with the QDR staff are free. And over the last 2 years, we've had students, from graduate students and faculty use this service. And then at the hope is then that those qualitative materials can be made available and the codes that were used to analyze that qualitative information can be made available. So in terms of our consultation service, I mentioned the sort of the metadata fair data principle aspect. And so we do have folks that are interested in trying to enhance their data curation and data management. So some of the resources that we have in our DMP tool guidance includes this sort of organization called the Data Curation Network, where you can find different primers about some of the data sets that you might work with, like confocal microscopy images, for example, or other types of files that have information about curatorial recommended practices for that specific data type. There's a great website called fairsharing.org, where you can look up by experimental method or journal, or just by domain or scientific discipline, specific minimal information standards and other metadata standards. As Ariel mentioned, one of those elements of the NIH data management plan is about how you've implemented your disciplinary standards where they exist. And we also have links within the DMP tool guidance for specific ontology resources. So some folks might be aware of the OBO Foundry or OntoB, which sort of gathers biomedical ontology. So you can sort of go through and say, okay, I'm interested in this gene ontology for the project that we'll be collecting data on. And then another part of FAIR is the R, or reuse, and trying to sort of identify data that you might be able to specify in a machine readable way, the permissions around that data set or code that you might be sharing as a result of the award. And then when we get to the FAIR part, the idea is to make these machine readable. So we have these PIDs, or persistent identifiers, that we help folks to sort of integrate within the metadata of their objects that you might have seen with Dr. Collins or Professor Marshall, where you saw we had ORCID identifiers, so persistent identifiers that identify you as the researcher, the DOI, or the digital object identifier, that's used not only for the data management plan now, but for the products that are resulting from the research. We have persistent identifiers now for organizations. So when we assign, when we can say who the funder was for the project, that there is a sort of a controlled vocabulary and identifiers for funders, and then identifiers for reagents and cell lines called RRIDs, or resource identifiers, that some might be familiar with because they published in journals that require RIDs assigned in their methods sections. So other PIDs that would be relevant from the library side, of course, controlled vocabularies and the actual standards themselves. And there are other PIDs that are controlled vocabularies for example, GIS type of information, but KEBI or medical subject headings, for example, and sort of making that available. So I'll end with some recommended readings. So one is the Smitchner article about 10 simple rules for creating a good data management plan. This has aged very well. Similarly, with our original DMP tool guidance, it was very NSF focused. So this new NIH data management sharing policy has given us an opportunity to sort of incorporate more NIH-based recommendations. And so another recent article by Kristen Briney at Caltech is the Foundational Practices of Research Data Management in the Rio Journal. That's an open journal there. Dr. Strasser, who has a primer from the NISO organization, overview of data management. Dr. Briney also has a book. We have her ebook that you can access. And then this recent paper that just came out this month, which is on 10 simple rules for getting and giving credit for data, which is great. And then I'll end, I saw that Biomed, their Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, had announced that there's a contest for, you can get $500 for an exemplary data management plan. So I thought, okay, this might be a great audience to make that plug for if folks are interested in participating. So with that, I will hand it back over to Ariel and Emily, and you can see if folks have any questions.
And Andrew, so far, there's no questions in the chat. It's just resources that have been dropped there.
Great.
All right, so unless anyone does have any questions, we will be closing out the seminar in just a moment. I am just going to put one more slide up. We will be sending out an evaluation for today's seminar via email. So please look for that in your email, and we would really love your feedback on this seminar. Otherwise, we would just like to thank our two great presenters today for their time and for the information that they provided. And a recording of this session will also be available up on the CTR website in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.